My parents wouldn't spend $85,000 to save my son's life, yet they splurged $230,000 on my sister's luxurious wedding. Years later, they showed up, and I closed the door on them. Can you even imagine watching your child slowly slip away, knowing there's a treatment that could save them for $85,000, only for your own parents to look you in the eye and say, "No, we don't have that kind of money"? But then, they turn around and blow $230,000 on your sister's extravagant wedding. That gut punch was just the beginning. What I found hidden in my late wife's necklace, the only thing I had left of her, changed everything. And it led to a reckoning my family would never forget. We don't have that kind of money lying around, Emily. You need to be realistic about this. My father stood in the doorway of my apartment, arms crossed, face stern. Behind him, my mother nodded along, her mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. I just stood there, my 7-year-old son, Ethan, asleep in the next room. His breathing was labored, even with the oxygen machine running. The medical bills were spread across my kitchen table like accusatory evidence of my failures. $85,000. That was the amount the specialist quoted for the experimental treatment that could save Ethan's life. His rare heart condition wasn't responding to conventional treatments anymore, and time was running out. My name is Emily, and I'm 31 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, working as a middle school science teacher, raising Ethan on my own. His father walked out when Ethan was diagnosed at age 3. Couldn't handle having a sick kid. That was 4 years ago, and I'd been fighting this battle alone ever since. My parents lived 20 minutes away in their comfortable suburban house, the same house where my younger sister, Clare, still had her childhood bedroom preserved like a shrine. Realistic? I repeated, my voice cracking. My son might die without this treatment. The doctor said he is maybe 6 months if we don't act now. My mother stepped forward, her hand touching my father's arm in that way she did when she wanted to soften his message, but wouldn't contradict him. Honey, we understand this is difficult, but we've already helped you so much over the years. We paid for 3 of his surgeries. We can't just empty our retirement accounts. I'm not asking you to empty them. I pleaded. I'm asking for a loan. I'll pay you back every penny. I'll get a second job. I'll do whatever it takes. My father shook his head. Emily, you're barely keeping your head above water as it is. How would you pay us back? Be sensible. There are payment plans, medical financing options. You should look into those. Oh, trust me, I had looked into them. I'd spent weeks researching every possible avenue. The payment plans would take too long. Ethan didn't have years to wait. The medical financing companies wanted interest rates that would bury me for decades, and most wouldn't approve me anyway because I was already drowning in medical debt. I've tried everything, I choked out, and my mother's expression softened slightly. For a moment, I thought she might actually convince my father. But then he spoke again, his voice firm. We can't do it, Emily. I'm sorry, but we have to think about our own future, too. We're not getting any younger. They left shortly after, and I stood at the window watching their car pull away. The weight of their refusal settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I walked into Ethan's room and sat beside his bed, listening to the steady hiss of the oxygen machine. His small chest rose and fell unevenly. He looked so peaceful in sleep, completely unaware that his own grandparents had just sealed his fate. I made calls the next day. I reached out to every family member I could think of. Distant cousins, my mother's siblings, anyone who might help. Most offered sympathy in small amounts that wouldn't make a dent. My Aunt Teresa sent $500 with a note saying she wished it could be more. I appreciated every penny, but I was trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon. 2 weeks later, I came home from a particularly brutal day at school to find Ethan struggling to breathe. His lips had a blue tinge that sent panic shooting through me. I called the ambulance, and they rushed him to the hospital. The doctor stabilized him, but the cardiologist pulled me aside with a grim expression. His condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated, Dr. Morrison said. Without that treatment we discussed, I'd say he has 3 months at most. Maybe less. I nodded numbly, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. 3 months. My baby had 3 months unless I could find $85,000. I started a crowdfunding campaign that night, pouring my heart into the description, sharing photos of Ethan's bright smile from before he got so sick. Friends shared it, teachers from my school donated, even some of my students' parents contributed. But after 2 weeks, I'd only raised $12,000. It wasn't even close to enough. Then came the phone call from Clare. My sister's voice was breathless with excitement. Emily, I have the most amazing news. Jeffrey proposed. We're getting married. I tried to muster enthusiasm despite the heaviness in my chest. That's wonderful, Claire. Congratulations. I know, right? And Mom and Dad are being so incredibly generous. They're paying for the whole wedding. Can you believe it? They said we can have whatever we want. No budget limits. Jeffrey and I are thinking a destination wedding. Maybe Italy or the south of France. Oh, Emily, it's going to be absolutely perfect. My hand tightened around the phone. No budget limits? None. Dad said this is his little girl's special day, and nothing is too good. We're meeting with wedding planners next week. The wedding won't be for another year, but we want to start planning now to make sure we get exactly what we want. I stood there in my tiny apartment, medical bills stacked on every surface, my son fighting for every breath in the next room, and listened to my sister gush about her unlimited wedding budget. Something cold and hard formed in my chest. A seed of understanding that would take root and grow in the months to come. The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits and mounting despair. I maxed out every credit card I owned, took out personal loans at predatory interest rates, and sold everything of value I possessed. My grandmother's ring, the one thing of my own mother's I'd been given, went to a pawn shop for $800. My car got downgraded to a 15-year-old sedan that barely ran. I moved from my one-bedroom apartment to a studio to save on rent. Through it all, every family dinner, every phone call, every interaction somehow circled back to the wedding. My parents were consumed with it, attending tastings at five-star restaurants, touring venues in Tuscany via video call, discussing floral arrangements that cost more than my monthly salary. I tried to be happy for Claire. I really did. She was my little sister, and there had been a time when we were close. But that closeness had faded over the years as it became clear that our parents saw us very differently. Claire was the golden child, the one who did everything right. She graduated college with honors, landed a prestigious job at a marketing firm, dated the right kind of men from good families. I was the one who got pregnant at 23 by a man who turned out to be worthless, who chose teaching instead of a more lucrative career, who couldn't even keep her son healthy. One evening in July, my mother called me. Emily, honey, we need to talk about the wedding. What about it? I was exhausted, having just finished a summer school session and spent 3 hours at the hospital with Ethan. Well, Claire wants you to be a bridesmaid, of course. But the dresses are going to be about $300, and we need you to order yours soon. $300. I did the math in my head. That was almost enough for 2 weeks of Ethan's medications. I don't know if I can afford that right now. There was a pause. Emily, this is your sister's wedding. I know that things are really tight. Ethan's medical expenses. You're always talking about Ethan's medical expenses. My mother interrupted, her voice taking on an edge. I understand he's sick, but life goes on for the rest of us. This is Claire's special day. I closed my eyes. Can I think about it? The deadline for ordering is next week. Claire has her heart set on having you in the wedding party. After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my studio apartment and cried. How had it come to this? How had my family become so blind to what was happening? My son was dying, and they were worried about bridesmaid dresses and seating charts. Ethan's condition continued to decline. The experimental treatment was no longer an option. We'd missed the window. The doctor shifted to palliative care, focusing on keeping him comfortable. Every day I watched my son fade a little more, his bright spirit dimming along with his physical strength. He stopped asking when he could go back to school. He stopped talking about wanting to be a scientist when he grew up. He knew, in the way children somehow know, that he was running out of time. I took a leave of absence from teaching to be with him. My principal was understanding, but it was unpaid leave, which meant my already precarious financial situation became catastrophic. I applied for every assistance program, every grant, every charity I could find. Most had waiting lists months long or criteria I didn't meet. In September, 5 months after my parents refused to help, Claire's bachelorette party happened. My mother called to tell me all about it. They'd rented a villa in Napa Valley for spa treatments, a private chef. It was absolutely magical, my mother gushed. Claire was so happy. You should have seen her face. How much did it cost? I asked, unable to stop myself. Oh, I don't know exactly. Your father handled all that. Maybe $10,000, but it was worth every penny to see Claire so joyful. $10,000. More than a tenth of what could have saved Ethan, spent on a single weekend. I felt something inside me crack. A foundation of familial loyalty that I'd been clinging to, despite everything. That sounds wonderful, I said flatly. You know, Emily, I wish you'd try to be more excited about this wedding. Claire feels like you're not really supporting her. I laughed, a harsh sound that startled even me. Claire feels I'm not supporting her? She does. She's noticed you've been distant, and you still haven't confirmed whether you'll be a bridesmaid. I can't afford the dress, Mom. I told you that. Well, maybe if you managed your money better, you wouldn't always be in this position. The words hung in the air like poison. Managed my money better. As if I had been spending frivolously instead of fighting to keep my child alive. As if the crushing weight of medical debt was some kind of personal failing rather than the result of a broken healthcare system and a family that chose fancy parties over their grandson's life. I have to go, I said. Ethan needs me. Of course he does, my mother replied, and I heard the unspoken judgment in her tone. You know, Emily, maybe if you weren't so focused on Ethan's problems all the time, you'd be able to enjoy life more. Claire manages to balance everything so well. I hung up without saying goodbye. October brought a cold snap that seemed to settle into my bones. Ethan was in and out of the hospital, his small body fighting a battle it couldn't win. The doctor spoke in hushed tones about weeks, not months. I spent every moment I could beside his bed, reading him his favorite books, telling him stories about what heaven might be like, holding his hand through the pain. My parents visited occasionally, usually on their way to or from some wedding-related appointment. They'd stay for 20 minutes, pat Ethan's hand awkwardly, and leave with expressions of relief. It was hard to watch their discomfort around their dying grandson. Hard to see how eager they were to escape back to the happier world of wedding preparations. Claire came once. She stood in the doorway of Ethan's hospital room, perfectly dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than my rent, and barely made it 5 minutes before claiming she had to leave for a dress fitting. He's so thin, she whispered to me in the hallway, as if this was news, as if I hadn't watched my son waste away day by day. Yes, I said simply. It must be so hard for you. She touched my arm in a gesture that might have been meant as comfort, but felt performative. But you're so strong, Emily. You always have been strong. I'd heard that word so many times in the past year, usually from people who were relieved they didn't have to be. Strong enough to handle this alone. Strong enough not to need help. Strong enough to watch your child die while your family spent a fortune on a party. The wedding is in 3 weeks, Claire continued. I really hope you'll reconsider being a bridesmaid. It would mean so much to me, and it might be good for you. You know, a chance to celebrate something happy, to have a break from all this. A break? As if I could take a vacation from my son's death. As if I could put on a smile and an overpriced dress and pretend everything was fine while Ethan fought for every breath. I'll think about it. I lied, because it was easier than explaining how her words made me feel. The wedding invitations had arrived at my apartment 2 months earlier. Heavy cardstock with gold embossing. The invitation suite alone probably cost $50 per guest. I did the math automatically now, converting everything into medical treatments we couldn't afford. The invitations could have been a month of physical therapy. The venue deposit could have been a year of medications. I learned later that the final cost of Claire's wedding was $230,000. $230,000. The number echoed in my head like a scream. They'd spent nearly 3 times what could have saved Ethan's life on a single day of celebration. The venue alone cost $80,000, roughly what I begged for. The flowers were $15,000. The food was $40,000. The dress was $12,000. I learned these numbers gradually through overheard conversations and my mother's casual mentions. She had no idea what each figure did to me. How every dollar amount felt like a knife wound. Or maybe she did know and simply didn't care. 2 weeks before the wedding, Ethan had a particularly bad day. His heart was giving out, the monitors screaming their warnings, nurses rushing in. I stood beside his bed, gripping his small hand, and watched the medical team fight to stabilize him. They succeeded, but Dr. Morrison pulled me aside afterward. Emily, he doesn't have much time left. Days, maybe a week. I think you should consider calling family, anyone who might want to say goodbye. I called my parents. My father answered, sounding distracted. Emily, we're right in the middle of the rehearsal dinner preparations. Can this wait? Ethan is dying, I said, my voice hollow. The doctor says days at most. There was a pause. Then, oh, Emily, I'm so sorry. Do you need us to come? Do I need you to come? My son, their grandson, was dying, and he was asking if I needed them to come. Yes, I said. I think Ethan would want to see you. Of course. We'll try to stop by tomorrow. We have the final venue walkthrough in the afternoon, but maybe in the morning. They came the next day, arriving at 10 a.m. with Starbucks cups in their hands. They stayed for 15 minutes. Ethan was barely conscious. His breathing labored even with the oxygen turned to maximum. My mother cried a little, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that probably cost more than Ethan's breakfast. My father stood stiffly by the door, checking his watch twice. We have to go, my father finally said. The florist is expecting us at 11. The florist, I repeated numbly. For the centerpieces. It's important we get this right. There's no time for mistakes this close to the wedding. He seemed oblivious to the irony of his words. Standing in a room where the ultimate mistake, choosing flowers over family, was about to claim its final victim. They left with promises to come back soon. Promises I knew they wouldn't keep. Claire never came to say goodbye to her nephew. She was too busy with last-minute wedding emergencies, like the fact that the string quartet she'd hired had a cellist who'd fallen ill and been replaced. This was apparently a crisis worth multiple frantic phone calls. Ethan died on Tuesday morning, 3 days before Claire's wedding. He slipped away quietly in his sleep, his small hand in mine. The nurse who pronounced him dead cried more than my parents would when I called to tell them. My mother's first words after I told her Ethan was gone. Oh no. Oh, Emily, no. What terrible timing. Terrible timing. Because the funeral would interfere with the wedding. The grief was overwhelming, but beneath it, I felt something else growing. A cold, patient understanding. They'd made their choice. Now I would make mine. The funeral was scheduled for Friday, 2 days before Claire's Sunday wedding. I didn't ask my parents to change the wedding date. I didn't ask Claire to postpone. I knew what the answer would be, and I didn't have the energy to hear them explain why their party was more important than my son's burial. What I didn't expect was for them to ask me to change the funeral. My mother called Wednesday evening. Emily, honey, we need to talk about the funeral arrangements. I was sitting in Ethan's room, surrounded by his things. His favorite dinosaur poster. His collection of rocks he'd found at the park. The science kit I bought him last Christmas that he'd been too sick to use. Well, Friday is really difficult for us. We have the wedding rehearsal that afternoon and the rehearsal dinner in the evening. It's all scheduled, deposits paid. Could you possibly move the funeral to Thursday or maybe next week? I stared at the wall, unable to process what I was hearing. You want me to change my son's funeral because it conflicts with a wedding rehearsal? It's not just rehearsal, Emily. It's the whole schedule. We have out-of-town guests arriving. Jeffrey's family flying in from Atlanta. Your father is giving a toast at the dinner. We can't miss it. Ethan is your grandson, and we'll be there to honor him. Of course we will, but Thursday would work so much better for everyone. The funeral home should be able to accommodate the change. Asterisk everyone. Asterisk. My voice came out flat, emotionless. I was beyond anger, beyond hurt. I'd entered some new territory where feeling anything seemed impossible. Everyone would be more convenient if we buried my 8-year-old son a day early, so you don't miss cocktail hour? Don't be dramatic, Emily. You're making this sound worse than it is. We're trying to support this wedding as it's your sister's. I hung up. I didn't trust myself to say anything else. The funeral stayed scheduled for Friday. I arranged it myself, paid for it with money I borrowed from my principal, who'd been more supportive in the past year than my own parents. It was a small service, just 20 people. My Aunt Teresa came, some teachers from school, a few parents of Ethan's former classmates. My parents arrived 45 minutes late, dressed in clothes clearly chosen for the wedding festivities to follow. They stayed for the service, but left immediately after, skipping the small reception I'd organized at my apartment. We really have to go, my mother said, kissing my cheek with lips that barely made contact. Claire is having a crisis about the seating arrangements, but it was a lovely service, Emily, very tasteful. Tasteful. My son's funeral was tasteful. I watched them leave, watched them drive away to their important appointments and critical emergencies, and I felt something inside me turn to stone. The grief was still there, crushing and absolute, but it was contained now, locked behind a wall of ice-cold clarity. Saturday, I spent alone in my apartment, surrounded by sympathy cards and medical bills. The crowdfunding campaign that had raised $12,000 had been closed, the money used up months ago on treatments that only delayed the inevitable. I owed $73,000 in medical debt, had maxed out credit cards totaling another $25,000, and my rent was 2 months overdue. Ethan's death hadn't ended my financial nightmare. It had just made it pointless. My phone buzzed with messages from distant relatives and friends, asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. I didn't respond. What I needed was impossible. I needed my son back. I needed my parents to have been different people. I needed to wake up and discover the past year had been a nightmare. Sunday morning, Claire's wedding day. I woke at dawn. I hadn't planned to think about it. I hadn't wanted to acknowledge it was happening, but my phone lit up with a text from my mother. Wish you were here to share this special day. Claire looks absolutely stunning. I stared at that message for a long time. Wish you were here. As if I'd simply chosen not to attend, as if I was missing it because of a scheduling conflict rather than because I'd buried my son 2 days earlier. I got dressed and went for a walk. Columbus was beautiful in late October, leaves turning golden red. Ethan had loved autumn. We'd planned to go to the pumpkin patch this year. Just one more thing that would never happen. My phone continued buzzing throughout the day. Photos from the wedding. My mother had added me to some kind of group chat with extended family. I watched the images load one by one. The venue in Tuscany, photographed at golden hour. Claire in her designer gown, a dress that cost more than most people's cars. The floral arrangements, elaborate and excessive. The 5-tier cake. The champagne tower. The string quartet playing on a terrace overlooking Vineyard Hills. $230,000 of celebration, while my son's body lay in a cemetery where I couldn't even afford a proper headstone yet. I scrolled through the photos with a strange sense of detachment. Everyone looked so happy. My father in his tuxedo, beaming with pride. My mother, elegant in her mother-of-the-bride dress that probably cost $3,000. Claire and her new husband, faces glowing with joy and possibility. Extended family members I'd called begging for help, now dressed in their finest, celebrating with champagne that cost more per bottle than they donated to Ethan's treatment fund. One photo showed my parents dancing, my mother's head thrown back in laughter. The caption read, "Best day ever." So blessed. I set my phone down and walked to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I'd lost 15 pounds in the past month, and my eyes were sunken, circled with dark shadows. I looked like I'd aged 10 years. I looked like someone who'd watched their child die while their family partied. That night, alone in my studio apartment, I made myself a promise. This wasn't over. They thought they could discard Ethan's life, discard me, and move on to their happy celebrations without consequence. They thought their money and their social standing and their self-centered priorities could insulate them from accountability. They were wrong. I didn't know how yet, but I would make them understand what they'd done. I would make them feel a fraction of what I'd felt. Not revenge, exactly. Justice. A reckoning. I pulled out a notebook and started writing down everything. Every conversation, every refusal, every dollar amount. I documented the timeline. When I'd asked for help, when they'd refused, when Claire's wedding planning began, when Ethan died. I wrote down who'd been at the funeral, who hadn't. I noted every expense my mother had mentioned for the wedding. I wasn't sure what I'd do with this information, but I knew I needed it. Evidence. Proof. A record of everything that had been taken from Ethan, from me. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother. Home from Italy. Exhausted, but so happy. Claire and Jeffrey's first dance was magical. I'll send you the video. I typed back. Glad you had a good time. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, we'll come by next week to check on you. I'm sure you're feeling better by now. Feeling better. As if grief worked on a schedule. As if 1 week after your child's death, you were expected to be recovered and ready to hear about how magical someone else's party was. I didn't respond. The weeks after the wedding passed in a gray haze. I returned to work, moving through my days like a ghost. My students were kind, softer with me than they'd ever been. The administration had granted me extended bereavement leave, but I declined. I needed the structure, needed something to fill the hours that used to be consumed by doctor appointments and medication schedules and hope. My parents called occasionally, brief check-ins that felt more like obligations than genuine concern. How are you holding up? They'd ask, and then filled the silence with updates about Claire's honeymoon, about remodeling projects they were planning, about holiday plans. They never mentioned Ethan. It was as if he'd never existed, as if acknowledging his absence might spoil their good mood. Claire sent a single text. I'm sorry about everything. I hope we can move past this. Move past this. Move past watching my son die. Move past being abandoned by my family. Move past the fact that she'd had a $250,000 wedding while my child suffocated to death because we couldn't afford treatment. I didn't respond to that either. In December, 2 months after Ethan's death, my parents invited me to Christmas dinner. I almost declined, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see them, to understand how they lived with what they'd done. Their house was decorated like something from a magazine spread. A 12-foot tree, professionally decorated, garlands and lights on every surface. The smell of expensive catering filled the air. Claire and Jeffrey were already there when I arrived, looking tanned and relaxed from their honeymoon in Bali. Emily, my mother, hugged me, her perfume overwhelming. I'm so glad you came. We've missed you. I stood stiffly in her embrace. Thank you for inviting me. Dinner was elaborate. Prime rib, lobster tails, sides I couldn't name. Wine that my father proudly announced cost $200 a bottle. Everyone talked and laughed, sharing stories from the wedding, from the honeymoon, from their comfortable lives. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate. Emily, you're so quiet, Claire said, her voice carrying that concerned tone that didn't reach her eyes. Are you okay? I'm fine. You know, Jeffrey and I were thinking, maybe you should consider moving somewhere else. A fresh start might help you heal. Columbus has too many sad memories now. I looked at her, at this woman who was my sister in name only. Where would I go? I don't know. Somewhere cheaper, maybe. I know you're struggling financially. Jeffrey's company has an office in Kansas City. Cost of living is much lower there. We could help you find something. Help me move away. Remove the uncomfortable reminder of their choices. I'll think about it, I said, another lie. My father cleared his throat. Emily, your mother and I have been discussing your situation. We think you need to consider bankruptcy. It's the responsible thing to do, given your debt. Bankruptcy for your medical bills. You'll never pay them off on a teacher's salary. Better to just wipe the slate clean and start over. Start over, as if Ethan was a mistake to be corrected, a financial error to be written off. We could help you find a good bankruptcy attorney, my mother added. Your father knows several. I set down my fork carefully. You know what would have helped? $85,000 15 months ago. The table went silent. Claire looked at Jeffrey uncomfortably. My mother's smile froze in place. Emily, my father said, his voice carrying a warning. We've been over this. Have we? Because I don't remember us ever really discussing it. You said no. And that was it. We made a difficult decision based on our financial situation. Your financial situation? I gestured around the room. This doesn't look like financial difficulty. The $230,000 wedding doesn't suggest financial difficulty. Claire's face flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? I stood up, my chair scraping against their expensive hardwood floor. You spent almost 3 times what could have saved Ethan's life on a single day. A party, flowers and cake, and a dress you'll wear once. Emily, that's enough, my father said, standing as well. His face was red. Angry. We made the choice we thought was right. We're not going to apologize for supporting your sister's happiness. And Ethan's life? What about supporting that? He was sick, my mother said, her voice shaking. The doctor said there was no guarantee the treatment would work. We weren't going to throw away money on something that might not even help. But you'd throw away twice that much on party favors and centerpieces that went in the trash the next day. Get out, my father said. If you're going to be disrespectful, you can leave. I grabbed my coat. Don't worry, I'm going. You're just bitter because your life didn't turn out the way you wanted, Claire called after me. It's not our fault you made bad choices. I stopped at the door and turned back. They were all standing now, a unified front against me. My parents, my sister, her husband. All of them comfortable, secure, righteous in their positions. Bad choices, I repeated. Like trusting family? Like believing blood meant something? Like thinking you'd choose your grandson over a party? I walked out into the cold December night and got into my beat-up car. I sat there for a moment, watching through the window as they settled back down to their expensive dinner, probably already dismissing me as dramatic, unstable, ungrateful. That was the last time I spoke to any of them for 4 years. Life continued because that's what it does. I declared bankruptcy, as my father had suggested, wiping out most of my medical debt, but destroying my credit for years to come. I moved to a cheaper apartment in a worse neighborhood. I took on tutoring jobs in the evenings and summers to make ends meet. I existed, but I didn't live. I also planned. I couldn't touch them yet. I was too powerless, too broken, too consumed with grief and survival. But I was patient. I watched from a distance, following their lives through social media accounts they didn't realize I could still see. I documented everything, adding to my notebooks. I waited. Claire got pregnant a year after her wedding. My mother posted constant updates about the pregnancy, the baby shower, the nursery preparations. The baby, a girl named Sophia, arrived healthy and perfect. The photos showed my parents beaming, holding their first grandchild, as if Ethan had never existed, as if Sophia was their first and only. I saw one comment on my mother's Facebook post from a distant cousin. "Your first grandchild. So exciting." My mother's response. "Yes, we're over the moon." Not a correction, not even an acknowledgement that another grandchild had existed, had died, had mattered. Ethan had been erased from the family narrative. I took a screenshot and added it to my collection. 2 years after Ethan's death, I went back to school, online classes at night, working toward a master's degree in education administration. I was promoted to assistant principal after 3 years. The salary was very good. I was building something slowly and deliberately. I also started saving money. Every extra dollar went into a separate account, one I never touched. I didn't know what I was saving for exactly, but I knew I'd need resources eventually. Power required capital. During those years, my parents tried to reach out occasionally. Birthday cards with generic messages. Christmas gifts sent through the mail, usually gift cards to stores I didn't shop at. My father called once to tell me they'd set up a small college fund for Sophia and wondered if I wanted to contribute. I hung up on him. Claire sent a birth announcement when she had her second child, a boy named Jackson. The card featured a professional photo of their perfect family, expensive clothes, and genuine smiles. On the back, someone had written, "Hope you're doing well," as an afterthought. I kept every card, every announcement, every casual dismissal, evidence. For years after Ethan's death, I was principal of a successful middle school, earning enough to live comfortably. Though I still kept my lifestyle modest, I'd rebuilt myself from nothing. Created a life that had purpose and meaning, even without the person who'd given it both. I'd also continued following my family's activities. Claire's husband, Jeffrey, had been promoted to vice president at his company. They'd bought a larger house in an exclusive neighborhood. My parents had taken up golf, joining an expensive country club. They traveled frequently, posting photos from beaches and European cities. Life was good for them, better than good. Then in early spring, something changed. I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Important family matter." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. "Emily, this is your Aunt Teresa. I'm reaching out because I thought you should know that your father lost his job 3 months ago. He's been trying to keep it quiet, but the situation is serious. His entire retirement account was invested in his company's stock, which collapsed when the company went bankrupt. Your parents have lost almost everything. They're facing foreclosure on their house. I know you and they aren't close, but I thought you'd want to know. Your father is too proud to ask for help, but they need it. Please call me if you can. Love, Teresa." I read the email 3 times. Then I went to my computer and started searching. It didn't take long to find the news articles. The company my father had worked for, a regional manufacturing firm, had been caught in a massive fraud scandal. The CEO was facing federal charges. The company had declared bankruptcy, and thousands of employees had lost their jobs and their retirement savings. My father's name appeared in several articles as one of the senior executives who'd lost everything. I sat back and stared at the screen. After all these years, after building their comfortable life on the grave of my son's memory, they'd lost it all. Karma, some might call it. Justice, others would say. I didn't have a name for what I felt. It wasn't satisfaction, exactly. It was more like recognition. The universe had shifted. And suddenly, I wasn't powerless anymore. My phone rang a week later. My mother's number. I stared at it, watching it ring, then go to voicemail. She called again the next day, and the day after that. I never answered. Then came a knock on my door one evening in May. I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing there. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, thinner, diminished. I opened the door, but left the chain engaged. "Yes, Emily." His voice cracked on my name. "Please, we need to talk. Can I come in?" "No." He flinched. "I know things have been difficult between us. I know we've made mistakes, but we're family. We need help." "Help?" I repeated. The word tasted strange in my mouth. I lost my job. You probably heard. We're in serious financial trouble. The house is in foreclosure. Your mother's medical insurance ran out, and she has some health issues that need addressing. We're asking our daughters for help. Claire and Jeffrey are doing what they can, but they have their own family to support. We thought maybe you could contribute something, even a small amount. A loan, perhaps, that you could pay back when your situation improves. I stared at him through the gap in the door. When my situation improves? I know you're doing better now. I saw online that you're a principal. That must pay well. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. Desperate? I said softly. That's interesting. I remember being desperate once. His face colored. Emily, please. This isn't the time to dredge up the past. Isn't it? I smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. You're asking me for money because you're facing financial ruin. That sounds familiar. This is different. How? Were your parents and Ethan was your grandson? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. How much do you need? I finally asked. Hope flared in his eyes, desperate and immediate. We owe about $90,000 on the house. If we could come up with that amount, we could keep it. But anything would help. Even $20,000 or $30,000 would give us time to figure something out. $90,000. More than what could have saved Ethan. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. I'll think about it, I said, and closed the door in his face. Behind the closed door, I leaned against the wall and smiled. Finally, after 4 years of waiting, of planning, of building myself back up from nothing, the opportunity I'd been waiting for had arrived. Now came the reckoning. I didn't contact my parents for 2 weeks. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Let them feel the anxiety of uncertainty. Every day that passed, their situation grew more dire. I knew this because I'd started checking the public foreclosure listings. Their house, the house I'd grown up in, was scheduled for auction in 45 days. During those 2 weeks, my mother called 17 times. My father called 9. Claire sent 3 lengthy text messages, explaining how our parents had always done their best, how they were good people who'd made some mistakes, how family was supposed to forgive and help each other. The irony was apparently lost on her. I responded to none of them. Instead, I did research. I looked into their financial situation as thoroughly as I could from the outside. The house was worth about $320,000, and they owed $90,000. They had equity, but not enough to start over somewhere nice. They'd have to move to a modest apartment, maybe in a less desirable area. They'd have to learn to live on Social Security and whatever my father could scrape together from a new job. If anyone would hire a 63-year-old disgraced executive, it would be hard for them. Humbling. A complete reversal of the comfortable life they'd built. But they'd survive. That was the difference between their situation and what Ethan had faced. They weren't going to die. They were just going to be uncomfortable. On the 15th day, I finally called my father back. Emily. He sounded breathless, desperate. Thank God. I was so worried you wouldn't call. I've been thinking about your request. I could hear the hope in his voice, pathetic and naked. I want to meet all of you. You, Mom, and Claire. We need to have a conversation. Of course. Of course. When? Where? We can come to you, or we can meet somewhere neutral. Whatever you prefer. My apartment, Saturday at 2 p.m. We'll be there. Thank you, Emily. You don't know what this means to us. I hung up without responding. Saturday arrived, cold and gray. Appropriate weather for what I had planned. I'd spent the morning preparing, arranging chairs in my small living room, setting out a folder on the coffee table. I'd printed documents, organized them chronologically. Everything was ready. They arrived at exactly 2 p.m., all 3 of them. My father looked worse than he had at my door, his suit hanging loose on a frame that had lost weight. My mother seemed to have aged a decade. Her hair more gray than I remembered, her face lined with worry. Claire looked uncomfortable, dressed too formally for my shabby apartment, clutching her designer purse like a shield. Emily, my mother said, moving as if to hug me. I stepped back. Sit down. They arranged themselves on my second-hand couch, sitting close together like children called before a principal, which I suppose they were. I remained standing. You asked me for $90,000. We know it's a lot, my father started. But we're prepared to offer collateral, to sign a formal loan agreement. We'd pay you back with interest. How? I asked flatly. You have no income. Mom doesn't work. What would you use to pay me back? I'm looking for work. Something will come through. At 63, with your reputation attached to a fraud scandal? He flinched. That wasn't my fault. I had no idea what the CEO was doing. Ignorance isn't innocence. You were a senior executive. You should have known. I picked up the folder from the coffee table. But we're not here to discuss your career failures. We're here to discuss your request for money. Will you help us? My mother asked, her voice small. That depends. I have some questions first. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Do you remember this conversation? May 16th, 4 years ago. I came to you and asked for $85,000 to pay for Ethan's treatment. My mother's face went pale. Emily, we've been over this, have we? Because I don't think we have. Not really. Not honestly. I held up the document, a printout of my original crowdfunding page with the treatment cost clearly listed. $85,000. You told me you couldn't afford it, that you had to think about your own retirement, that I needed to be realistic. We made the best decision we could at the time, my father said stiffly. Did you? I pulled out another paper. This is a receipt from Claire's wedding planner. Total cost of services, $230,000. Paid in full by you, 18 months after you told me you couldn't afford $85,000 to save your grandson's life. Claire stood up. This isn't fair. You're twisting everything. Sit down, I said, my voice hard enough that she obeyed. I'm not finished. I pulled out more documents, laying them on the coffee table one by one. Wedding venue, $80,000. Flowers, $15,000. Catering, $40,000. Dress, $12,000. Photographer, $8,000. Band, $10,000. Should I continue? What do you want from us? My father demanded. An apology. Fine. We're sorry. We made a mistake. Is that what you want to hear? A mistake? I repeated softly. You think choosing a party over your grandson's life was a mistake? We didn't know he was going to die, my mother whispered. Yes, you did. The doctors told you. I told you. You knew. And you didn't care enough to help. I pulled out another document, the one that hurt most to look at. A photo of Ethan in his hospital bed, taken 2 weeks before he died. This is what $85,000 would have saved. This child, your grandson, remember him? My mother started crying. Claire looked away. My father stared at the photo with an expression I couldn't read. Emily, please, my mother said through her tears. We know we failed you. We know we should have done more. But we can't change the past. We can only ask for your mercy now. Mercy. I placed the photo back in the folder carefully. That's interesting. I don't remember receiving much mercy when I begged you for help. When I sold everything I owned, when I maxed out every credit card, when I moved to a studio apartment and ate ramen so I could afford Ethan's medications. We didn't understand how bad it was. My father said, didn't you? I told you multiple times. I showed you the medical bills. I explained that without treatment he would die. What part of that was unclear? Silence. But you understood perfectly well how important Claire's wedding was. You understood that the centerpieces needed to be exactly right, that the venue had to be perfect, that your daughter deserved the best money could buy. I sat down across from them, my voice calm and measured. Here's what I've learned in the past 4 years. You didn't help Ethan because you didn't want to. It wasn't about the money. You had the money. You proved that. It was about choice. You chose what mattered to you. That's not true. Claire protested. They were trying to protect their retirement, were they? Because they spent almost 3 times their retirement concerns on your wedding. Math doesn't lie, Claire. Priorities don't lie. My father leaned forward. Emily, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But are you really going to punish us now when we need you most? Are you going to be as cruel as you think we were? Cruel, I said, tasting the word. Is it cruel to make choices based on what matters to you? Is it cruel to decide that your resources should go toward your own priorities rather than someone else's crisis? Because that's what you taught me. That's the lesson you gave me when Ethan was dying. So you won't help us, my mother said flatly. I didn't say that. I picked up the folder and pulled out a check I'd prepared. I'm willing to give you $90,000. Hope bloomed on their faces, desperate and immediate. However, I continued, there are conditions. Anything, my father said quickly. We'll sign whatever you want. Payment plans, interest, collateral. It's not about payment. I set the check on the table between us. It was made out for $90,000, dated for today. The first condition is that you acknowledge, here and now, that you chose Claire's wedding over Ethan's life, that you had the money and refused to help. I want to hear you say it. They stared at me. Claire looked at her parents. You don't have to do this. She's trying to humiliate you. Yes, I agreed. I am. Just like you humiliated me when I begged for help. When I stood in your doorway with medical bills and you told me to be realistic. When I buried my son alone because you had a rehearsal dinner. So yes, I want you to say it out loud that you made a choice and Ethan died because of it. My mother was crying harder now. My father's face was red, but they needed that check. They needed it desperately. We chose the wedding, my father finally said, his voice barely audible. We had the money, and we chose to spend it on Claire's wedding instead of Ethan's treatment. And, I prompted. And he died because we didn't help. Mom, I looked at my mother. We should have helped you, she whispered. We should have saved him. We were wrong. I turned to Claire. And you? What's your role in this? I didn't know, she said quickly. I didn't know they'd refuse to help Ethan. Didn't you? You never wondered where the money for your elaborate wedding came from? You never thought it was odd that I asked you to move your bachelorette party because Ethan was in the hospital, and you refused? You never questioned having your wedding 3 days after your nephew's funeral. She had no answer. Here's the second condition, I continued. You take this money, you save your house, and you never contact me again. No birthday cards, no Christmas gifts, no phone calls. You remove me from your lives completely, the way you removed Ethan from your memories. You go back to pretending I don't exist. Emily, you can't mean that. My mother said. We're family. No, I corrected her. We shared DNA. Family is something else. Family shows up. Family sacrifices. Family doesn't let children die while they plan parties. I stood up and walked to my door, opening it. Those are my conditions. Take the check or leave it. You have 60 seconds to decide. They looked at each other. A silent conversation happening in glances and expressions. I watched them calculate. Watched them weigh their pride against their desperation. It took them 43 seconds. My father picked up the check. We accept your conditions, he said, his voice hollow. Good. There's a document on the table next to the check. It's a formal agreement that you'll have no further contact with me. Sign it. They signed without reading it, which told me everything I needed to know about how desperate they really were. My father's signature was shaky. My mother could barely hold the pen through her tears. Claire signed with angry, sharp strokes, her face red with suppressed rage. When they finished, I collected the document and handed them the check. You can go now. Emily, my father started, but I cut him off. You agreed to the conditions. No contact means no contact. Leave. They filed out silently. My mother crying. My father's shoulders slumped. Claire walking stiffly beside them. I closed the door behind them and locked it. Then I walked to my bedroom and opened my laptop. I pulled up my bank account and looked at the balance. The $90,000 I'd just given them had been transferred from my savings this morning. That account now showed $12,000 remaining. Years of careful saving, of living modestly, of putting aside every extra penny, reduced to almost nothing. But I wasn't done. I opened my email and composed a message to my Aunt Teresa, the only family member who'd shown any real concern for me over the years. I attached a document, a letter I'd written months ago, waiting for the right time to send it. Aunt Teresa, I wanted you to know what really happened with Ethan. I've attached a complete timeline of events, including all the requests I made for help and the responses I received. I've also included documentation of the expenses my parents incurred during that same period, particularly regarding Claire's wedding. I thought the family should know the truth. Please share this with anyone you think should see it. Love, Emily. I hit send. The document I'd attached was comprehensive. Every conversation, every refusal, every wedding expense, every hospital bill. The photo of Ethan in his hospital bed. Screenshots of my mother's Facebook posts calling Sophia her first grandchild. The timeline showing how my parents attended Claire's rehearsal dinner instead of Ethan's funeral reception. Everything laid out in chronological, undeniable detail. My Aunt Teresa had a large extended family network. She was the type who forwarded emails to dozens of people, who shared everything on social media. By tomorrow, everyone would know. My parents' friends, their country club, their church, their neighbors. The truth would spread like wildfire. The check I'd given them would clear. They'd keep their house, but they'd lose something more valuable. their reputation, their comfortable social standing, the image they'd carefully crafted of being generous, loving parents and grandparents. Everyone would know what they'd really chosen, what they'd really valued. A knock came at my door an hour later.